Okay, welcome everyone to the 2025 Sydney Patristic Forum. I want to thank Notre Dame for hosting us. I want to thank Dr. Mario Bagos for the connection, and I would like to thank Dr. Kevin Wagner for accepting, this invitation to be the moderator of the discussion after each of the presentations. Now, this series I've dubbed Sydney Patristic Forum goes back some years. Vicky is quite aware of that because it goes back to the times when Dr. Ken Perry was still at Macquarie, and he was the one who established the so-called Patristic Forum as a monthly kind of colloquium that gave the opportunity to postgrads to present their work basically, but also to scholars discuss their research and so on. And when it stopped, I thought that being part of it, we should somehow continue with that project, and that's what I have been doing with lots of friends during the last 3 years. So this year I decided to devote the series to a quite, I believe, interesting topic, which is the relation between theology and philosophy. And I think it's quite interesting because it explores this it will explore this relationship in Byzantium, which is not quite a researched sort of area. We know lots of things about the relationship between theology and philosophy in the West, in medieval Europe, but we sort of either overlook or not study that much the same relationship in the East, the Eastern Roman Empire. Now, basically, I'm gonna present to you a paper which was it was prepared, for a special issue, but it never made it because the issue was it was regarded as too contemplative, too theoretical for the issue. Very good, but not quite, what we would be expecting from something more, let's say, fact-based, positive sort of presentation. So that special issue was on religion and science, which is quite trendy nowadays. And of course, religion and science, theology and philosophy, those things, in the minds of both the West in medieval times, but much more in Byzantium, overlap. So in Byzantium, religion basically is state religion, and state religion is Christianity, Eastern Orthodox Christianity. And science, episteme, is more or less conflated with philosophy. They're not quite distinct, although they have started becoming thus. So many a time I will be talking about theology and philosophy. Basically, that's my topic. But you will, come across religion and science. But it's not a different topic. It's the same topic. So this topic is theology, and there is an emphasis of that and theology in Byzantium. Because in Byzantium, you cannot really talk about the one by ignoring the other. Now, and basically I'm interested in, presenting this interface between the two. Now, the present study, what I'm going to present to you, aspires to demonstrate the existence of a truly integrating model regarding the relation between science and religion in Byzantium. That is, between what the Byzantines themselves regarded as science and religion, Additionally, the study does not intend to show that this was the only model throughout a millennium or so in the life of the Byzantine world, but that this model, which I will be calling, an integral model, was the dominant one, albeit with variations. Lastly, the relationship and interaction under discussion are approached in a way that emphasizes the tension that has always accompanied the model, regardless of or even because of its integrating capabilities. After all, the interface, that is the means that allowed for the integration, was inherently and peculiarly dialectical. So the tension, is inherent. The exploration of the relationship between science and religion in Byzantium involves by necessity the consideration of philosophy, and even more so, theology. It is through the syncrasis of philosophy and theology in all its forms that science and religion could be in a dialogue, so to speak, in the first place. This was so due to the philosophy-oriented conceptualization of science in the ancient world, already, in classical Greece. A conceptualization that Christianity continued throughout the medieval times, and furthermore to the hierophanic character that the ancient world ascribed to science. Science was hierophanic, spiritual in the ancient world. It was not just, like a positive, dry thing we understand nowadays. Even nowadays it's spiritual, but we don't want to admit it that much, especially when it comes to scientism. In other words, doing science was part of what was expected from a philosopher. And doing philosophy was only truly possible on the part of a theologos, of a new religion. Thus, the factor mediating the integration of science and religion was Byzantine philosophy cum theology. Philosophical theology, or to put it otherwise, theological philosophy, in Byzantium was at the same time a datum, a given, and a postulatum, something you aspire for. Something given and self-evident, but also something desired and challenging. Ostensibly, there was a continuity between antiquity and the Byzantine world, but equally so, there was a discontinuity between them, since Christianity brought about a shift, in the hierophanic core of the ancient Weltanschauung. What was regarded as the sacred within Christian experience, namely the uncreated, cum created, in the person of Jesus Christ, both caused and determined this discontinuity, dialectics, by challenging the integrity of the ancient ontognosio-logical frame and reconstituting it as onto-theological frame. Nevertheless, this endeavor was never complete in practice. Never. But had to be performed again and again and again. That's what we're doing nowadays. We're still trying to do this again and again and again. In light of the above, it is clear that the issue of the relationship between science and religion in the Byzantine era can theoretically and should methodologically be reduced to the problem of the relationship between Byzantine philosophy and Byzantine theology. In any other case, one might accumulate a historiography of relevant interactions between science and religion, but they will fail to produce a phenomenology that makes sense of them. Okay? You can, go through the history of science in Byzantium, saying, we have these sort of advances, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you make a quite long and interesting series of, inventions. But how are you supposed to understand it in terms of their gist, their peculiarity, their distinctiveness? Thus, if in agreement with the mentality of antiquity, the Byzantine cultural paradigm holds philosophy to be the culmination of science, from a formal point of view, and if moreover the same paradigm sees theology and philosophy as identical, okay, what's the ultimate philosophy is theology in that paradigm, from a material point of view. Okay? Then the subject matter of this study consists in the following questions and hypotheses. 1. If there is indeed such a thing that can justifiably be called Byzantine philosophy, because not everyone agrees, you know that, then the existence of an integrated epistemological model regarding philosophy and theology, and by extension science and religion, in Byzantium should be regarded as a sine qua non. Necessary. 2. On what basis was such an epistemology possible, given the fundamental difference that historically and culturally was associated with the phenomena involved since antiquity? 3. In what sense was Byzantine philosophy cum theology continuous, yet at the same time discontinuous to ancient Greek ontognoseology? That is, to what antiquity acknowledged as the epistemic status of knowing. Is ancient knowing the same as Byzantine knowing? 4. If the Byzantines could not but substantiate theoretically both science in general and the particular sciences, then it seems that this reflected and consolidated their historical consciousness. That is, their being in history. This is very, very important, because the ancient Hellene is not a being in history. The ancient Hellene is a being in nature. So it's different. It's a different being. A different, experience of existentiality. In the present study, my methodological perspective draws heavily on historical, of course, phenomenology school, of what we call, Religionswissenschaft, studies of religion, and the hermeneutic phenomenology tradition of continental philosophy, especially, the work of Gadamer and Ricoeur. My critical approach utilizes a hierophanic understanding of religion and science, a fourfold typology of syncretism. There are 4 types of syncretism, which we will see in this relationship. Certain analytical distinctions in Hellenism, because Hellenism is not one thing, not historically, but phenomenologically it's not one thing, it's not one experience. And a peculiar dialectics regarding the Christian experience of divine revelation. These research tools enable one to bring forth the nuances and intrinsic problematic involved in the complex interactive field that science and religion, theology and philosophy, Christianity and Hellenism constituted throughout the Byzantine Empire. The study also pays due attention to the distinctive qualities of different figures in different periods. And basically I bring in as very short case studies John Damascene, 8th century, the Middle Byzantine intellectualism. We do have that sort of thing in Byzantium. It's not just a Western, disease, inverted commas. And Gregory Palamas, 14th century. The Byzantine integration of science and religion, an epistemological sine qua non. So this relationship, this integration for the Byzantine was a given, necessary. One way of answering the question whether a genuine Byzantine philosophy ever existed is to confirm or not the ongoing presence of ancient philosophical thematics. The questions asked, did the questions continue amongst the interests of Byzantine intellectuals? Actually, this is not my view, because this is the view of Katerina Ierodiaconou, the well-known professor of Byzantine philosophy. She says that, it's very silly to say that we don't have a Byzantine philosophy, first of all, because the thematics continues. So if the thematics continues, the history of that problematics goes on, regardless of the answers. The same would also be pertinent in the case of sciences or science. Undoubtedly, such a presence cannot be challenged, since it features strongly in the areas of logic, metaphysics, gnoseology, and ethics. The questions asked in logic since Aristotle continue. The questions asked in metaphysics since Plato continue. The questions asked, in ethics since the Stoics continue. The answers are different. To be sure, not equally strong in every period, but nevertheless, it is there, and sometimes it emerges in ways that either develop further ancient considerations, as in the case of the metaphysics of hypostasis, individuality, and personhood, or add new and original insights, as in the case of the gnoseology of iconicity and historicity. An early thinker, quite telling in this connection, whose oeuvre became highly influential and standard in Byzantium, is John Damascene. His tripartite Fons Scientiae, πηγή γνώσεως, especially its last part, namely Expositio Fidei, έκδοση ακριβής της Ορθοδόξου πίστεως, deserves a close examination. The proem to Fons Scientiae acknowledges in a limited yet clear-cut manner the significance of non-Christian wisdom in terms of philosophy and or science, while it also urges the reader to pursue the latter eclectically. The first part of the work, called Dialectica, κεφάλαια διαλεκτικά, constitutes an abridged and modified version of late Neoplatonic logical theory. When we say late Neoplatonic logical theory, basically we mean the tradition of the commentators on Aristotle. All of it embedded as a necessary part into a broader theological corpus, while at the beginning, in a kind of programmatic fashion, it presents some very common definitions of philosophy and gnosis. Gnosis not in the sense of Gnostic, but gnosis, knowledge. Whereby, quite surprisingly, it is stated that nothing is more precious than knowledge. The scientific philosophical first part is followed by a purely theological second part about the historical development and phenomenology of heresies, which in turn leads to the third part of the overall work. What one can perceive here is a dialectics between the parts of Fons Scientiae that culminates in a synthesis. In other words, the intertwined organization of the scientific, philosophical, and religious theological materials brings forward a systemic integration. The very structure of the work, is this integration. Knowledge, something that pretends to be knowledge, and then something that is the ultimate knowledge, brings forward a systemic integration or an integration of structure apart from the eidetic or thematic integration that are operative at other levels within the work. Whereas eidetic integration or integration of form is most prominent in the dialectica. It's very hard when you read the dialectica, these chapters, to let's answer the question, okay, where's the Christian here? It's very hard. There is a Christian perspective in this logic, but it's not just perceivable. You have to really uncover it. So although that one is most prominent in the dialectica as an integration, thematic integration or integration of content is a guiding idea in the Expositio Fidei, the third part. In the latter, John Damascene combines in a remarkably seamless manner his theological topics, basically triadological and Christological, with substantial information on cosmology and anthropology. So he talks about God, and then he talks about the cosmos, and then he talks about Christ, and then he talks about the human being. And you know, this thematics is very integrated. And materials come from the theological tradition, and other materials come from the science tradition or philosophy tradition. This information covers the entire so-called book 2 of the Expositio Fidei, which is chapters 1545. This is anthropology and cosmology. More specifically, the cosmological information covers topics such as the sky, light, the sun, the moon, the stars, the constellation, air, and the various winds, as well as the earth, utilizing thus knowledge offered by the disciplines of astronomy, meteorology, and geography at the time. On the other hand, the anthropological information covers topics such as emotions. As far as I know, it's the only systematic work in the Byzantine era where we have something like a theory of emotions. So if you want to talk about emotions in Byzantium, you have to absolutely start with John Damascene. Otherwise, you might be thinking that you are dealing with emotions, but you don't have the methodological acumen to substantiate your argument. Emotions, imagination, the senses and sensory perception, the intellect, memory, thinking, action, will, volition, and deliberation. And lastly, self-determination, what we call, aftexousion, and freedom. Thus, the scientific philosophical component of Expositio Fidei draws also on the disciplines of psychology, physiology, gnoseology, and ethics of the time. What is noteworthy is the fact that chapters 20 to 25 are introduced and concluded by chapters that refer not to standard scientific topics, as you would expect, but to conspicuously religious ones. The creation of the universe. So John starts talking about the cosmos, the universe, using the disciplines of his time, but he starts by introducing that topic, big one, by talking about the creation. We're religious now, thematics. That's how they integrate. The creation of the universe, the aeons, the angels, the demons, and paradise. The same is true for chapters 26-45, wherein John Damascene intersperses materials on the creation of humans in the image and likeness of God, as well as their fall and salvation according to divine economy, that is God's providence, foreknowledge and predestination. So this go into anthropology, although they don't belong according to the ancient paradigm. This means that in this part of the Expositio Fidei, the Damascene is not just working out a model of thematic integration, but also exhibiting a certain degree of eidetic integration, a deeper integration, whereby he suggests not only a combination of heterogeneous contents, but even more so, the creation of a unified form out of these very contents. So it's a very, very subtle, sophisticated work. What one discerns in Font Scientia in terms of the relationship between science, philosophy, and religion theology is a typology of syncretism at the end of the day. We don't like the word, but the word, has to be sort of, purified from its low, negative, used analytically. In Exposition Fidei, dominant is a combining type of syncretism. That's one type, consisting of different topics coming together from different sources of information, which in turn is interpolated by an integrating type of syncretism, formed by unified topics from different sources of information. The second type is the very essence, one could say, of the dialectica. That's why when you read the dialectica, you cannot really say where's the pagan thinker and where's the Christian thinker. The syncretism there is so integral, okay? Whereas when you read the other parts, you can see, and that's why we know his sources. The second type is the very essence, one could say, of the dialectica, whereby the integration is so complete, refined, and accomplished that the Hellenic philosophical information seems virtually intact. However, it has been decisively transformed through means of exclusion, what at the end of the day he puts in logic, what he keeps out. Condensation. Just to give you an example, ousia, physis. One thing, although in ancient logic they're not. But for this logic, they are one. John knows that they're not one, but he doesn't care. He says that from now on we're going to treat them as one. Simplification and innovation in light of the sensitivities and criteria of Christian theological teaching. The end result is so successful that one can describe the dialectica as a Hellenic logic that is thoroughly Christian. The balanced and comprehensive treatment of science and religion in the work of John Damascene, perhaps the first to have achieved something like this within Christian experience, was not always the case in subsequent thinkers and periods. In particular, the Hellenizing humanist intellectuals of Middle Byzantium, Mikhail Psellos, Ioannis Italos, Eustratius of Nicaea, and Michael of Ephesus, and mystics like Gregory Palamas were either more philosophically predisposed, the first bunch of guys I refer to, okay, or more theologically inspired, Palamas, respectively. The tension between science and religion, due to the fundamentally different hierophanics in each case, was always there, the tension. Also, changing historical conditions required, ostensibly, different negotiations of the relationship between the two. When both the Hellenic and the Christian legacy had to be safeguarded, both of them, in the context of the Caliphate, then balance and comprehensiveness was the answer. That's why we have John Damascene and his work. We wouldn't have him and his work without the Caliphate. When rediscovering the richness of Hellenism was what provided new avenues to meaningfulness during the Comnenian dynasty, then science and philosophy were lively pursued. 11th, 12th century. While religion and theology were perpetuated in a rather ossified manner. They become sort of, stereotypical. Lastly, when the very Christian identity of the empire was at risk due to Ottoman encroachment, religion was treated as a matter of life and death, while science was put aside. The Hesychast movement was not a priority. The priority was something else. Christian onto-theology versus Hellenic onto-gnoseology. Now, both science philosophy and religion theology in Byzantium presupposed and entailed different hierophanic experiences of human life. Religion might have resembled more or might have been closer to hierophanics, but that does not mean that science had been foreign or irrelevant to it. To be sure, the hierophanic character of ancient philosophy had already been noted and acknowledged in scholars. It has. Nowadays, no one disagrees upon that. I mean, if Socrates, Plato, Thales, Anaximenes were also, spiritual figures as such, it's a given now. But science seems to resist this kind of association. However, the latter was dependent on and determined by the former, philosophy, in antiquity. If Hellenic philosophy developed out of a certain reflection on the experience of being, in, then Hellenic science was reflected equally, albeit differently, the same experience. And if being was regarded as the sacred, that is, as the foundational point of reference in human life by philosophers, then scientists, in one way or another, followed in the same steps. To put it otherwise, in was experienced as the sacred, philosophy as the realization of a set of foundational hierophanies, physis, logos, eudaimonia, with their concomitant primary hermeneutical hierophanies, the theories and methods of the different schools of philosophy. Okay, you have the sacred, basic hierophanies, fundamental, foundational, and then basic hermeneutic hierophanies that interpret those. Those are different schools. So what's Platonism? Platonism is a hermeneutic, hierophanic tradition that interprets the foundational hierophanies. What's physi? What's logos? What's eudaimonia? And those are basically reflections, manifestations of in. While science was realized on the basis of a set of primary hermeneutical hierophanies, cosmos, arithmos, techni, along with their concomitant secondary hermeneutical hierophanies. So we have sacred, foundational hierophanies, the primary hermeneutic hierophanies, which are the philosophical schools. This is where science and philosophy overlap, and science then goes another step below, where we have the secondary hierophanic hermeneutics. So science is as if a base, the last level. This is the ontological, gnoseological, and logical continuum of ancient Greek metaphysics. The way you think in ancient Greece, is the way you know, and the way you know is determined by what you are. The on determines the gnosis, and the gnosis determines the logos, the reasoning, which is informed. Greek metaphysics is informed, we informed ancient Greek science thoroughly. The level, ground level. In this sense, one could speak of the hierophanic continuum of ontognoseology, wherein gnosis mediates between and connects the ontical and the logical element to one another. All of them belong to the same order and are intrinsically related. All of them are experienced as ontical, gnostical, and logical. The relative difference being one of functionality. It's a monistic world. The difference is only functional. Such a hierophanic system is monistic, wherein everything abides by the law of circularity. Everything goes like this. Okay? So to speak. Repetition, sameness, immanence are the defining aspects of this system. And it is in light of them that one can truly appreciate the programmatic interest of Hellenic philosophy, science, in the general. Το γενικό, το καθόλου. The immutable. The eternal. It is precisely this Aristotelian, as it has been dubbed, conceptualization of science that Byzantium inherited from antiquity and perpetuated in its own way and for its own purposes. The Christian experience of Byzantium has to be kept in its proper historical perspective and thus seen in juxtaposition to Hellenic ondognosiology. Originally, Christianity, this is very important, had no philosophical scientific interest whatsoever. Okay, Christians don't care about that thing. I mean, deep down, deep inside. It starts, and by extension, Christianity, at the beginning, had no propensity towards ondognosiology. Especially with regards to philosophy science, it starts interacting with ontognosiology once it finds itself in a position of antagonism. Okay, when it's challenged with other religious agents during the imperial period of Roman times. It is worth noting that precisely in order to sustain itself in this kind of antagonism, as you start, becoming more and more and more amongst the Roman world, you have to sustain yourself. So how are you going to do that? Christianity attempts to tackle the opposition, real or perceived, posed by philosophy science and, for that matter, ondognosiology. This shows two things. Firstly, that philosophical scientific ondognosiology was indeed hierophanic. Otherwise, the Christians wouldn't give a penny. Most definitely, at its core, it was such at its core. And the Christians understood that. Deep inside it, at the core of science, the core of philosophy is religious, hierophanic. Otherwise, Christian thinkers would not have bothered to give the battle, so to speak, on such ground. And secondly, that in principle, ondognosiology was not incompatible with the markedly different hierophanic system that Christianity represented. It was different, definitely, but it was not incompatible. But how was the tension between them resolved? According to Christian hierophanics, what is regarded as sacred, namely God as Trinity, is radically different from the universe. One could even say totally other to reality as such. That is why such a sacred has aptly been described as, Rudolf Otto said this, das ganz andere, totally other, in its absolute transcendentality. Nevertheless, the relationship between these two poles of otherness, God and reality, is a given which the Byzantines understood as a relation between the uncreated, aktiston, and the created, ktiston, the contours of which were extensively reflected upon and elaborated during the mystical movement of Hesychasm during the 14th century. At the same time, the interface between the uncreated and the created is the event of revelation. That's the interface of the two, revelation. An event, the event of revelation, an event that erupts and disrupts the integrity and coherence of reality, only to reconstitute it again as something new, canon, new. In this reconstitution that connects the parts of reality, what connects the parts of reality is not anymore self-sufficient gnostical capability, my gnosis, as in Greek philosophy, but the experience of revelation that fills up the self-consciousness of gnostical incapability. Okay, it's as if you have the Hellene in their spectrum of capability, incapability, and at a certain point, the spectrum ends. There's a gap. When you realize this, when you have the experience of this, that the spectrum stops and doesn't go any further, you do two things you do. Or three. One is despair. The other one is suicide. And the third is revelation. You are, gifted with something else, And that's what happened with Christianity. Thus, ontognosiology turns into ontotheology. The place of gnosis is taken up by theos. This highly dialectical reconstitution of Hellenic ontognosiology in light of the Christian experience of divine revelation is in structural terms the solution that was given to the problem of the hierophanic tension between philosophy, science, and theology, religion. The intellectuals of the latter, Byzantium, took the hierophanic order of Hellenism in its entirety, and put it under the Christian sacred. That's the ingenious thing that the Christian theologians, the fathers of the church, did. So you had one thing, let's say one ball, self-contained, self-autonomous, the sacred is in there. So they said, look, I'm going to take the sacred out of you. I'm going to do a sort of demystification, demythologization, okay? And you're going to end up being, dry. That's what you are. And what I've taken out of you, I'm going to put it on top as being different for you. Okay? But in doing so, everything in ontognosiology remained the same, formally, yet became other materially. This is most tellingly exhibited in what has been pertinently described as anti-homonymic demarcation. We say the same things, but we don't mean them the same way. Homonymic demarcation. We say ousia, but we don't mean the same thing. We say hypostasis, we don't mean the same thing. We say everything the same, and this is something ingenious but at the same time so problematic, because it creates confusion. If you haven't really devoted your life on sensing this, you say lots of silly things afterwards. You read a Christian text and you say, look, they have copied the Greeks, because you don't understand what you're reading. You think the other person was so dumb just to copy. Although you are dumb. The other person is using the words of the other against the other. And that's that's the masterful character of the whole thing. What is this anti-homonymic demarcation? The term is not mine. It's Professor Siastros from Thessaloniki, a professor of dogmatic theology. The process of circumscribing the meanings, the Christian meanings, that were not the Hellenic ones, which were traditionally associated with certain terms. The dialectics of a syncretic epistemic typology. The theoretical solution just delineated with regards to the problem of the relation between science and religion, and of course philosophy and theology, in Byzantium constitutes, to be sure, the solution reached mostly by those intellectuals who espoused theological orthodoxy. This means that there were also other options to look at the same problem and to accommodate the differences between the two contenders, even if these options were not as good, efficient, and or convincing as the one presented by the integrated model. In this respect, it would be appropriate to delve into these solutions to appreciate better the integrated model via comparison. At the same time, my aim is to put forward a relatively elaborate typology of syncretic epistemology. In order to challenge the view that throughout Byzantium there was supposedly in place a rather simplistic schema about some kind of contradiction between science and Christianity. Not only was reality much more complex, but it was also quite asymmetrical in its development. Even if one were to present two trends as being at tension throughout Byzantium, namely continuity and contradiction between science and Christian belief, they would have to acknowledge that there was a range of positions between the two extremes: the assimilation of philosophy and science to Christian religion, and the radical rejection of anything having to do with pagan philosophy and science, as well as the extremes themselves in different intellectuals corresponding to different circumstances and pressures. Such intellectuals, who in some respects could be seen as Byzantine epistemologists, would definitely be people like Michael Psellos, Ioannis Etalos, Evstratos of Nicaea, Michael of Ephesus, Grigorios Pachymeris, Theodoros Metochitis, and lots of others. From their views on religion, science, or the relationship between the two, one can articulate at least four types of epistemic approaches. Approaches that presuppose and entail a different understanding in each case regarding the syncrasies between science and religion. We can go through those four in our discussion. Deconstructing Chalcedonianism. The Byzantine model of integrated epistemology does not just stem from the dialectical reconstitution of ondognoseology into ondotheology, but one could maintain that it is ultimately rooted in the very core of Byzantine Christology, namely the Chalcedonian definition. In other words, it is the very message of theology in Byzantine Orthodoxy that postulates integration regarding the relationship between science and religion, philosophy and theology. The Fourth Ecumenical Council declared its faith in Christ as a person in two natures, unconfusedly, unchangeably, indivisibly, inseparably, thus validating anything that genuinely comes under these two natures, both sensu stricto and sensu lato. As evidenced in subsequent Christological debates, the divine, represented by religion, theology, and the human, expressed as science, philosophy, involve much more than static essentialism. They encompass all their relevant manifestations, and even more significant is the assumption that divine and human manifestations can exist jointly and integrated thanks to the interface of personhood. That's why we can have, a very modern, epistemologist like Michael Polanyi, who speaks about the personal nature of knowledge. From a semantics point of view, the divine and the human consist in anything that denotes their presence, and for that matter, they are equivalent to religion, theology, and science philosophy, respectively. Furthermore, and again from a semantics point of view, the one and only person in Christ signifies a dialectical principle that substantiates the synthesis that not only is possible, but all the more desirable between the natures and energies of religion and science. So basically, what I'm putting forward here is that if you take the definition and you deconstruct it, that is, try to understand it beyond theology, because it's written in theology, but it presupposes, it entails much more than theology. So if you do that, the whole interface, the whole dialectic between science, religion, and philosophy, theology becomes apparent.
Isn't that your scientific base? That you said before, science is the base, and I thought immediately of Christology. Wouldn't that be?
There's two things. That's why I presented the one first and the other one second. But this one is peculiarly Byzantine. At first, these are the conclusions. The first thing that is quite evident in the Byzantine understanding of science is that it more or less constitutes an Aristotelian version of episteme. As such, it is quite philosophical in character, interested in general relevance and applicability knowledge, and oriented towards explanation through causes. At the same time, the culmination of such knowledge is thought to be achieved in metaphysics and indeed theology. The latter is termed the perfect science, for it is the most general and the most explanatory, thanks to its necessity and eternity conventions. And at the same time involves the highest form of eudaimonia. However, there is nothing truly Byzantine in this picture, and one needs to delve deeper to identify the distinctiveness of the Byzantine epistemological method. Having attempted such an exploration, the present study has reached the following conclusions. Not only there is a genuine and robust Byzantine philosophy, but all the more the latter can be traced in relation to epistemological questions that eventually led to the articulation of an integrated model regarding philosophy and theology, and by extension science and religion. Given the fundamental difference that historically and culturally was associated with the phenomena involved, it is between Hellenism and Christianity, the condition of possibility for the epistemological discussion is to be found in the inclusiveness of the Chalcedonian doctrine concerning Christ. In light of the latter, Byzantine philosophy presents itself as continuous with theology, but with fundamental qualifications as to ancient Greek ontognosiology. To answer very quickly that question, there is a Chalcedon, before Chalcedon, already operative, doing the ontognosiological into ontotheological, and Chalcedon after Chalcedon, still. And in Chalcedon, we have the revelation of why this was happening. In light of the latter, Chalcedon, Byzantine philosophy presents itself as continuous with theology, but with fundamental qualifications as to ancient Greek ontognosiology. This combination of continuity and discontinuity forms an epistemic status of knowing that yields a fourfold typology of syncretism. Lastly, although the Byzantines could not but substantiate theologically both science in general and the particular sciences, they did not proceed to the creation of a distinct theology of science. This is something that the historical consciousness of Christianity, that is, the Christian being in history, has to work out based on the insights that Byzantium has to offer for the sake of a much more integral intellectual and spiritual life world in the future. Thank you.